92 Morning Joe at 22 past the hour. Live look at the White House. Lights are on. Joining us now, Democratic Senator from Virginia, Senator Mark Warner. Should we be nice to him today?
We'll be nice to him today.
We're not going back there.
We're not going to go
about today.
We're not going to go.
Exactly.
What's special about today?
No, there's a statute of limitations on sucking
I think
up,
it's,
so we've forgiven you.
And there's a statute of limitations on calling him out. Okay. So Republican Senator from Georgia is here as well, Senator Saxby Chambliss. Both were members of the so-called Gang of Six, which recently briefed the Debt Super Committee on their ideas to reduce the deficit, because you know that Super Committee is just going to nail it.
Oh, no doubt about it.
Really come together and make it happen.
So,
right?
Saxby, let's start with what's most important to your constituents. That is the fact that the Bulldogs finally beat the Florida Gators this weekend.
And I was right there in the middle of it.
Were
It
you
was a great weekend.
The world's largest cocktail party.
World's largest outdoor cocktail party, and we work hard to uphold that tradition.
But you did, and congratulations. And you will be pulling for Alabama this weekend against LSU, right?
I'm going to sit back and watch, because that's going to be one heck of a football game.
That is. Oh, it really is.
It's going to be great.
Senator Warner, since you don't play football in Virginia, let's go and just talk about the budget. I'm joking. You've got some good teams there. So what is the possibility of the Super Committee actually doing something that makes a difference?
Well, I think the chances are actually improving. I mean, if last week you started to see some offers go back and forth, we've now built our group from the so-called Gang of Six to where we've got 45 senators saying to the Super Committee, you go big, find $3 trillion in debt reduction.
Wow.
Balanced, make revenue through tax reform, entitlement reform. We say, we got your back. There's now about 100 House members, almost equally divided. Yeah. The business community is starting to weigh in. I mean, let's face it, this debt battle has almost become proxy for whether our democratic institutions are up to the job. And I think it's really important we get it done.
And Saxby, you guys are on the inside, but for those of us on the outside just looking for clues, I really liked what I heard last week coming from Nancy Pelosi and John Boehner. Both of them sounded like they were in a giving mood. And, Nancy will usually say, no, you're not going to touch Social Security and Medicare. But last week she was like, it's got to be on the table. We've got to compromise. John Boehner said the same thing. Do we have a reason to be hopeful?
The fact of the matter is you can't do this with just reducing spending. You can't do it with just reforming entitlements, and you can't do it just on the revenue side. It takes a combination of all three, and the more you're involved in it, like Pelosi and Boehner have been over the last several weeks, the more you realize that. So I'm encouraged by what I heard from them. I mean, these guys have still got a long ways to go on that Super Committee, but they've got power like no committee we've ever seen before. I mean, they can bypass, Joe, you know how it works. You got to go through the regular order to get something done. They can bypass the regular order. They've got the power to do that. And what we're asking them to do is to go to $4 trillion over 10 years. Now that's pretty good. But you have to remember the last 3 years we've had deficits annually of 1.6, 1.5, and probably 1.2.
I was going to say 5 years ago, $4 trillion would be course changing. Yeah. In this case, Meek, it really only stops the bleeding.
Yeah, and we're going to have to come back and do it again.
Because we're looking at $14.5 trillion, but we got to start driving that debt to GDP ratio into manageable terms.
So if you're looking at $4 trillion over 10 years, these are obviously very hard times, and I would think some would even prognosticate that it could get worse before it gets better, and it's going to be a long time before unemployment improves. What kinds of ways of bringing in revenue will this Super Committee be able to agree upon, actually have both sides agree upon, that will be significant enough to also help reboot the economy?
One of the things that we did was we basically took our effort and built it off of Bowles-Simpson, which was not about raising tax rates. It was actually, in most cases, lowering tax rates, but taking a lot of the tax expenditures down dramatically, simplifying the tax code. We raise $1 trillion a year in tax. We spend about $1.1 trillion a year in income tax exemptions. You can cut everybody's taxes in half and actually raise more revenue if you're willing to get rid of all the tax expenditures, tax breaks. We're not suggesting you do all that, but there's a lot of headroom there to be able to generate revenues and lower rates.
Is there headroom?
And on the corporate side, what we did was we made it revenue neutral, but we eliminate, again, expenditures and credits from corporations and take that savings from corporations and reduce the rates to historic lows. And what corporate CEOs have told us is that you give us certainty in the tax code, And we'll take this money that we've got sitting as cash today on our balance sheets, and we'll invest it in our companies. We'll create jobs. We'll put people back to work and create jobs for these folks who are out here protesting today. And we will see economic growth like you can never imagine in this country if we will truly reform the code like, frankly, we proposed.
John Howman.
I want to ask you guys both a question about President Obama. Two related questions. One, as we go forward right now, is there a constructive role the president can play in this process? I know it's in the hands of Congress at this moment, but should he just stay on the sidelines, or should he be saying things about this and trying to help, number one? And number two, a historical question, which is just a yes or no. Was it a huge mistake for him not to endorse Simpson Bowles back last December?
I think without question he appointed that commission, and it was his ball game to play in, and he should have endorsed it if he really felt it in his heart that that was the right direction to go. And looking back at it now, I got to believe his folks are telling him, wow, we missed an opportunity. Should he be involved right now? Hey, he is the chief executive of the United States, and we're not going to solve this without the involvement of the chief executive. Now, it's up to him politically and otherwise as to what role he decides to play, but Congress has ultimately got to make the decision, and the ball really is in our court.
Mark?
And I would just simply say, when we came out with our Gang of Six plan, he endorsed it. That helped in some corners, it hurt in others. I do think, I wish he would have spent those first 3 months of this year, frankly, just educating the American people and all of us about some of these choices. Some of this is just math in terms of some of the entitlement programs. The fact that with some of this on revenues at 70-year low, revenue or expenditures at an all-time high, 25% versus 15%, and whenever there's been a balanced budget, we've been around 20% on both spending and revenues. This is just logic. And the one thing you'll be able to see if they're really getting close is if you start seeing the interest groups on both sides start squawking. That'll be the best indication around if this super committee is getting close to a deal.
So Saxby, you and I came in '94 along with a guy named Tom Coburn. Tom and you were both conservative, but very different in your approaches. Tom was with me while we were making small explosives and throwing them at the leadership. You tried to work inside the system. And yet you and Tom Coburn have both taken what I consider to be a courageous stand. And that is to say to our base what you just said. We're not going to do this without cutting entitlements, cutting spending, and generating more revenue. And doing that by closing tax loopholes. What has been the response in Georgia? What's been the response from conservative special interest groups in Washington? How much pain has it caused you politically? Let's say what Tom Coburn said.
Well, obviously, you've got folks on the right who don't like any change in the tax code unless it's just purely reducing taxes. We are reducing tax rates, and we're going to stimulate the economy by doing so. People did not understand what Bowles Simpson did, therefore they didn't understand what we were doing in adopting the basic philosophy of Bowles Simpson.
But your goal is to bring more revenue to the federal government by closing loopholes.
We've got to, and here's why. It's not rocket science. Based on the year ending September 30, 2010, spending relative to GDP was at 25%. Revenue relative to GDP was at 14.5%. That's a 10.5% gap there. That's why you had $1.5 trillion deficit that year. We've got to close that. Historically, we've had revenues at about 18%, spending at about 19%. We've been able to manage that 1% deficit, and that's why our debt rose every year, but it rose only slightly. Now, we have simply got to get spending down. There's no question about it, but by the same token, you got to get revenues up.
Yeah. Okay. Hard times to be doing both. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Senator Warner and Senator Chambliss. Coming up is